So I think we are going live now. So hi, everybody. I'm here with Adrian Villegas from the Latino Comedy Project. So to begin with, film and television are powerful mediums and have been instrumental both in perpetuating racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, and transphobia, as well as breaking ground and helping Americans envision a more equitable world. During this interview, we will discuss inherent racism and lack of representation of the BIPOC voice and face on screen and on stage. Adrian Villegas will talk about his experience as an actor, producer, and director in an industry. He will also share about his project, Estar Guars. Hi, Adrian, how are you today?
Hi, Monet. I'm good.
Thanks for having me. So yeah, we're really excited to have you and talk about this really exciting, so kind of live theater mixed combination project you have going on. Is there anything else you want to talk to us about yourself, about your history, your background, and how you got into this?
Well, the Latino Comedy Project is a little over 20 years old now. Okay. Yeah, we started in '98, and it ties into what this series is about, because the reason the group was started in the first place was because of lack of representation, or more specifically, lack of opportunity for representation. Some of the members of the original cast were UT theater students, and they would never get stage time in the productions. So the LCP was started to provide a platform for Latino artists to create their own material. We wrote all of our own material from the beginning, and it was all of our own expression of our culture and our experiences. And then we produced it, and I was one of the original directors of the group. So the whole existence of the group came out of a lack of representation and taking the initiative to not wait for somebody to hand us that representation. So that's like embedded in the existence and the character and the mission of the group. And then, just as we suspected, there was tons of talent that was untapped, and showed up. And the response to the LCP was instantaneous from the very first show, even before the very first show. And it was in the audience, the electricity in the audience was because they were seeing something that they recognized that they had not really seen enough of or seen at all before. So, so that's always been very important to the mission of the group and to me personally. So.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of segues into like the question I want to ask you. So just tell us a little bit more about this film, but kind of how hard was it to make, or not the film, but the stage play, how hard was it to make it from idea to financing to production? And how important was it for you to have representation, not just in front, like with the actors, but also behind the scenes with like the production people and all that?
Well, the LCP took a break for about 4 or 5 years in the early ends, and through various circumstances, we had an opportunity to do a reunion show. One of our original members made a connection to do a reunion show. So we started back doing shows again in 2016. We did a show called Gentrifucked that was really successful. And then we did our own run of it in 2017 and all that stuff. So we started building back up an audience. I had this idea for Estar Guars, but I didn't take it too seriously until one of our members, our token white boy, Nick Walker, my brother from another mother, I told him the idea about a mashup, and he said, yeah, and if you were to produce it and make it this was all his idea, a May 4th / Cinco de Mayo event.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like almost mad at him. I was like, man, that's too good of an idea. We have to do it now.
Yeah, like, how did I not think of that, right?
Well, that's always the best ideas. The best ideas were like, why didn't somebody think of this already? So at that point, I took the idea very seriously and started thinking about the idea thematically. But the other problem was, if we were going to do it, it was going to be a big production. I mean, you wouldn't half-ass that idea.
Yeah, because something as big as Star Wars, right? You have to make it big because of what it is and what it has represented to people.
Our sketch shows, we try to keep very utilitarian, where we have we wear black, we put things on top of it if we need to. Quick set changes, nothing too extravagant. This show is not going to be that. So I said, the only way we can do this is if we do like a Kickstarter. And at that point, it built up over a few different runs, a mailing list of a very supportive audience. And I said, okay, we have the ability to maybe tap into that if they want to see this. So I kind of tested the idea for a couple of months. I didn't commit to doing it yet. I was just kind of like telling people the idea. And that convinced me as much as anything else, because I would just mention the idea. I would mention some of the ideas like Yola and things like that. And people would just light up and they go, oh my God, you got to do it. When is it going to happen? And I'm like, okay, if people are going to get this excited about the concept, then that means that if we promote it properly, when we do it, people will want to see it.
Yeah.
So then we did the crowdfunding, and our fan base really came through on that. We had enough money to commit to starting it, and then it just became like a year long, to write it and then to cast it, and it's like a 15, 16, 17 people cast. I mean, it's like,
that's a pretty big cast.
It was the biggest thing I'd ever directed, and it took a toll. It took a toll because you know how it is with anything, an endeavor like that. You could have the best laid plans, but those, yeah, God laughs at your, right? So, but we got it up, by the May the 4th weekend of 2019, and and the audience loved it from the very first show, and to our great relief and joy. But it was a lot of work. That even the Kickstarter by itself, I've given people who've asked me advice about Kickstarters and crowdfunding, and I tell them, don't treat that like an addendum to your show or to your project. It is its own project. It has its own marketing campaign. It has its own ups and downs in the time. I mean, like there were times where I was thinking it wasn't going to make it. Like, so it was like, okay, I had this plan that I'm going to get this juiced here. That doesn't happen. Then you're like, well, what's plan B? What's plan C? And then you have to it's a marathon, and you just have to not stumble for too long. So that was a whole ordeal. And then the show, of course, was a lot of work, but it ended up being worth it because the secret thing about the show that people don't know going in a lot of times is that how political and how emotional it is. They go in thinking, because of obviously the very aggressive kind of comedic pitches to market it, they think it's going to be like a Brown Spaceballs. So that was really satisfying that they came in and they got a lot more thematically and emotionally than and character-wise too, because the characters aren't just knockoffs. I one of the reasons I even wrote it was because I said, unless I can make these characters appealing in their own right as characters, because Blazing Saddles was really a funny parody, but I actually love Cleavon Little and G. Wilder as characters.
Yeah.
I did that with this, and people see archetypes that they recognize and from their own community and the relationships that they recognize, then it'll be worth writing. I didn't want to just write a parody because I've done that forever with LCP. So make a long story short, it took a lot of work, a lot of production. There was a lot of video stuff. There was, we had all kinds of people helping, costumes out the ass. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it was a lot, and but it turned out very satisfying and very for us and the audience. So I was very happy and relieved that turned out that way.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of leads me into the next question I want to ask. You talked about being like personal and political. So like the personal is always political. And I know that when we watch films, we make personal connections to the characters and the themes that are in the film, which I know you must have with Star Wars. I know I've seen interviews with you where you talk about how Star Wars played a role in your life. How important was it for you to reinvent Star Wars to represent you and your culture, to essentially rewrite the narrative to see yourself in it?
Well, that kind of started real organically, because when you start saying, okay, I'm going to write a Latino version of this, what is that? Is that, I mean, what does that mean? So I started finding ways to fit personal observations over my lifetime into the show. Like, for instance, just in my family, how much the women carry in family that's unheralded and unacknowledged a lot of times, and that's a reality I don't think anybody can deny. And then at the time in politics, how much women were taking the reins in politics in a way that had never happened before. And then also just on a personal level, like for instance, you go, well, what would a Yoda be on a Latino take of that? And that would be an abuela. Like, that's the wise, most powerful what's the word? Unsuspectedly powerful. People always, they underestimate women in general, but like an elderly woman. And that's where a lot of that power is coming from. And you don't even realize until they whip. So my grandma, my great grandmother. So then from there, it just became, you know, who would a Obi-Wan be in certain families? You know, what would the princessa be like, and what kind of personality, and a Han Cholo, you know, like what would his approach to the world be, while still sticking with those kind of archetypes of, you know, the loner, the loner with the heart of gold, like Han Solo.
Yeah.
So then it just became connecting up with those, the equivalent archetypes in our community, in our culture, and then giving them enough specificity and personality that they didn't feel like just walking archetypes, you know. So and then the bigger structure of it is, well, how does the struggle in the Star Wars universe, which is basically, really, I mean, Lucas is talking about fascism. He's talking about fascism, right?
Yep.
So the show directly deals with that, of the fascism, the form of rising fascism we're dealing with right now, and also the fact that it utilizes stupid people, because the ice troopers in this show are sitting around like a couple of MAGA guys bitching about things that, you know, the prejudices they have and all that stuff, because that's the building blocks. So I just kind of found, like, you know, tied things to what we're living with every day, and relationships that are kind of familiar to us, and just be kind of, you know, just reflect that truth and keep it human, you know. And of course, and there's tons of commentary in it. Some of it's under, you know, subtext. Some of it's very overt, usually done. But yeah, so it was just a lot of threads. And then of course the show also has a thread that's behind the scenes, like a making of Estar Guars, like a fake documentary about the history. Because we all grew up with those, right? Like the documentary. So there's many layers, but in terms of the core of it, of like finding what is the equivalence from the Star Wars universe. And the other thing is, it's a very simple story. Star Wars is essentially a very simple story. And it is about what, you know, the whole original trilogy, which is why it's still so powerful, is really just about what kind of person are you going to choose to be? Because it gives you these very specific examples, how Vader chose to be, how Luke chose to be, how Luke is tempted to become, and how he actually persuades somebody to become good again. And Luke and Han, you know, he's always kind of going back and forth between, is he going to be that guy that's going to help, or is he going to be self-interest? Or so it's very a morality play that way. And this is also, I mean, I think there's some very, very direct, inspirational moments that are kind of reminding the audience in this moment we live in right now, that we have the ability to make the world better and to not give into cynicism. Because Star Wars is like the most anti-cynical things that's ever been created in fiction when you get down to it, you know. And I wanted that message to come through for our audiences that show up, because part of authoritarianism and fascism is to beat you down spiritually before they even do anything, right? So and we've all, I think, felt that in the last few years. Yeah. So there's the uplift basically at the end of it.
Yeah, I think it really does. But going back to like representation, I would say, like, just me looking back on watching Star Wars, there's like 18 plus hours of the movies of Star Wars, right? And in me watching it, I never see anybody who looks like me or who represents me as a person. Like when I look at it, I'm like, oh no, that's like, I can be that person. So how important was it with you in making a Star Wars to put people out there who somebody like me or like a little girl can say, oh, I'm like that person. So to see themselves represented back to them.
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of times in comedy, I tell people a lot of times comedy is just telling the truth that nobody's mentioned before or that doesn't want to mention. And one of the things that's funny to me watching the Star Wars movies now is like, Princess Leia was like busting her ass for who knows how many years, maybe since childhood, right? Yeah. To you know, this subterfuge and the rebellion, and like who knows what kind of organizational and like strategic mind she had developed right at that point. And then this farm boy comes along and like just is dropped in the middle of this, and he becomes the hero.
Right. Yeah.
Hero day with no preparation, no background, no nothing, and she just kind of takes a backseat to that. So like that, for instance, there's jokes made about that in the show, because in reality, the princesa would be the hero.
Exactly.
Or one of the primary heroes at the beginning, and maybe other people would come and join. But that the show subverts, like, obviously there's representation because it's a Latino production, or Latinx production. But in terms of the gender stuff in the show, there's a character called R2 Me Too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a combination of the functions of R2 and C3PO, but she's basically a droid that enforces boundaries and like behavior, and for men primarily, obviously, because they're the ones who need the enforcement the most. But that's a running joke in the show, because I think she just represents like the id of the frustration and the anger that gets generated through just the bullshit that has to be tolerated just as a matter of course in our culture. So, and the audience is, I told the actress Thelma Rosanna, who played it this time, I told her, I said, just deliver the character to the audience. They're going to be on your side, like immediately.
They're going to be there with you.
Yeah. Once they get where your character is coming from, I said, they're going to be cheering you on the whole rest of the show, because I saw it happen the first time. Of course, nobody knows you're telling them the truth until they experience it, right? And last night it happened, and I heard her. It was almost like I was backstage and I could hear her performance like take a little twist from that point on, because she was like, oh, it was like a relief.
Oh,
like,
he was right. Yeah.
This audience buys this, and this audience is here for it, you know. That's I think a representation of a voice that an issue that we're still dealing with. But Princesa is like the major, not a passive hero in the show. Yola obviously is like the most powerful character in the show, representing that spiritual power and that emotional power that we draw from in our elders and stuff, and with that love too, you know, that kind of guiding, that maternal love. It's kind of, you're trying to guide people to the right thing, but you also know how to be firm when you have, right? It's that combination of things that's very specifically feminine, in a way that men I don't think have learned to do enough of. I think we're all capable of learning to be more different ways, with just the culture we're in that prevents us from it.
I think it's like the patriarchal culture, right? That sticks us in these boxes of this is how you have to be. And if you deviate from this, you're not normal.
Yes.
Right?
And exactly, as I was going to say. So it's like, and it punishes people for going outside of those things. So that was really important to me, to make it kind of, it's kind of cliche to say a feminist thing, but it's definitely leans a lot on acknowledging the role that women play in our culture, and the pillars that women are in our culture. Because I don't I've told a lot of people this, but like when I was traveling with my one-man shows years ago, I go to different colleges and different organizations, like student Mecha and cultural organization stuff, and without fail, the people who were doing everything, like getting things done, that were like organizing, getting things done, carrying out, it was always the young women. Regardless of whether the president of the organization was a guy or whatever, it was the young women. I'm like, yeah, it happened all the time. And I think that's true across the board in our families and in society, and
Yeah, I have to joke with my fiance, like, where would you be if I wasn't here? But that's true, right? Like, if I wasn't here, he'd be eating like Hot Pockets and doing video games all day or something. So kind of relates a little to that. But I think you mentioned Yola. Sorry, go ahead.
What does he say when you tell him that?
He's like, yeah, I know. I don't know what I'd be doing. He's like, I know. So
at least it's it.
He acknowledges it. Yeah, but so you talked a little bit about Yola, the character, how she's kind of the main character, the main driving force. So in Star Wars, we know Yoda is kind of the life teacher and spiritual leader for the Jedis, and he has a great impact on Luke Skywalker's life. And I know you made Yola to be kind of in the representation of your grandma and great-grandma. How was that important when you created her, and how does that reflect just in the overall presentation of the play?
Well, I've used my family in a lot of ways over the years. I mean, my solo shows, I've had characters based on my dad, based on my grandpa, my brother, And I'd never done any. Well, no, I'd written sketches that featured my grandparents as characters and stuff, but never made a character overtly in something like this based on my grandmother. And of course, my grandmother is incredible. She passed away last year, but she was an incredible individual. And on her 90th birthday a few years ago, I followed her around with a video camera and just interviewed her and filmed her interacting with all the people, because we had tons of people that showed up for her 90th at her house. And I was saying, of course she's not going to be, we're lucky she's still here, but of course she's not going to be ever. And I thought, I need to do this because people will not believe us. The kind of person she was, they will think we're exaggerating, that we're making it up. It's like, no, I want to capture her personality because it's so big and so unique and just so funny and so much wisdom. So I wanted to capture that. And whenever I came on the idea that the Latino Yoda was going to be an abuela, of course. And my great grandmother, her mother, we found video of her a few years ago that had been, I don't know where, VHS, at one of her birthday parties when she was in her probably her late 80s or early 90s. And she's walking around the hall where we're having the party, and she's like, I'd forgotten, but she with her hands behind her back, just kind of walk around. And I'm like, look at this little patent over here. You look like a general, just everything. And I'm like, and I remember I was like this tall. She was tiny, but even in that video, it's like she was so powerful. So I combined the personality in a way of my grandmother with the kind of the physical appearance with the big glasses of my great grandmother, and came up with Yola. And a lot of the jokes the lines that she has in the show are verbatim for my grandma. Yes. And I had to tell people after one show, I was like, that one joke, I'm not going to spoil it, but I was like, that wasn't that really happened. Like that.
My grandma said that.
Yeah, that was her. Now, the great thing about that, though, for me personally, was the last Saturday that we did a show, the first time we did it. My family was able to bring my grandmother to
great.
Austin, and from Waco. It's where I'm from, Waco, Texas. And they brought her to the show, and she was in the front row, and the show went over great, and people fell in love with. In fact, we have a joke in the show toward the end where Yolo just pops up, and we're like, "What are you doing here?" And she was like, "Hey, you got to give the people what they want, and they want mas Yola." And she's like, audience always like, "Yeah, we do," So they were in love with that character, and at the end of the show, I was able to get up there, and the cast was so sweet. They gave me flowers as a director and all that stuff, and I had in my hand. But I told the audience, you remember when it said in the show that Yola was based on the creator's grandmother, because it's a meta and Jorge grandmother, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, Yola's here. The woman that it's based on is right here. And they just went crazy. They applauded. She felt like a star, told them, and I went down and gave her my roses because she deserved it more than anybody. And then I told them, yeah, she's going to be 93. At that time, she was going to be 93 in the summer. And they went ape shit again. And she got to experience that, she got to experience that appreciation. And they just got, the thing that's so amazing about that is they just got a sliver of the human that she is from the character in the show. And that was enough for them to say, we really appreciate this person here, if she could inspire that. And we follow, then she's very special. And so this show is dedicated to her. She passed away last May of last year. And, 94 years old. And I spent a lot of time talking to my mom in the months after she passed, just talking about, it makes you think about everything, right? When you lose somebody to you. And it's like, life is interesting because she was 94 and we said, it still feels like she left too soon. And she could have been, she could have hung around another 10 years and would have been, but the show, the character is honoring her, the audience responds every time. And I even told Eva McQuaid, who plays the part, when I asked her to play, she was the first person I asked to do the show because I wanted somebody who I knew could kind of capture that attitude. And she does a great job. She came back this time to do it. And I told her, I said, this, just let you know. And I hadn't even written the script yet. I said, you're playing the character that's going to steal the show.
gonna be the show.
Yeah, and that's turned out to be true. You know, the audience fell in love with the show. So I take that every time we do the show, and the audience locks into that character and looks forward to seeing that character again.
Mhm.
I take that as a homage to my grandmother's spirit, because it's her spirit in the character, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's really like good to have made an abuela the Yoda, right? Because we sometimes take them for granted, much like Luke took Yoda for granted. We don't realize what we have until sometimes it's too late. And then, but they are the ones that keep all the secrets and all the history and everything for the family. Like you go to them when you want to know something, right? So I think that was really, like, it was really great to incorporate that into the play that you did. I really
And
love
just, oh, I will tell people like what you just said, which is very important. Get those stories from them now while they're here, because they're going to go with them.
Exactly.
And it's going to be a copy of a copy. Like your parents may know some stories, but they're not going to know all of them. Get them from the source while you can. And don't think they're always going to be here, because they're not. I mean, for a long time, for many, many years, every time I saw my grandmother and my aunt who passed away before her, I would say, treat this moment like this is the last time you're going to see them, because it might have been. And then that changes the way you interact with people. So that's just my advice to appreciate why they're there, and always act, even if they're not 80s and 90s, even if it's just a friend, somebody you value, always act like this. That may be the last time you see them or get to talk to them.
Yeah.
And it will raise your appreciation and your valuing of them, but it'll also ironically raise your own enjoyment of life, because you'll remember to savor it while you have these things in front of you.
Yeah, to savor every moment that you have. So now I kind of want to go back to something we talked about, kind of jump back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, which is the use of comedy. So what is it about comedy that allows people to discuss truths about our societal situations, specifically in Estar Guars, to deal with the hard issues such as the ones you portray with the Imperial clone enforcement, which basically comes to mean ICE, and like the Galactic Wall? So how is comedy used to combat these really serious issues that we're dealing with now?
Well, satire is really just kind of exaggeration, right? So that's very useful. Ridicule in general, I'm a firm believer in ridicule. I don't engage with people on social media as far as like getting in arguments with dummies and stuff anymore. But unless I say like, oh, I can humiliate them, they're bullshit. Let me do that. Then I will sometimes if I have the time. Yeah. Because it's useful to put somebody in their place, but it's also useful to people who are observing to just correct the picture, correct the record, correct whatever bullshit they're trying. So ridicule can be very useful. Like for one example in the show, there's they're going to attack not the Death Star, but the Galactic Wall, like you said. And R2 goes through the plans, and it turns out there's like multiple ways to take the wall down. Like they said we can do a wormhole tunnel under it. We can put a space station over it. We can go through this hole. Because in reality, that's what happened. I mean, that wall, yes, that wall represented such great authoritarian, destructive symbolism for the people who really were excited by that idea. It's like, yeah, those assholes, we got to keep them out. Those, you know. And it turns out to be a joke. Like whatever he tried to build, it's like the weather's torn it down at this point, right? Yeah. So that is an appropriate response to that, because the reality is it's not. It wasn't the symbol that those guys were wanting to imagine it was in their heads. It was a joke. So guess what? You can make a joke about it. So I'll tell you now. Satire in itself is not a weapon. Like satire is not going to stop jackboots. But telling the truth in a way that everybody can connect to, who's of like mind, like that to me is the value. Like, in fact, that's why we did the show again, but we could have waited. But the last couple of years during the pandemic, I've told people like, I don't need to get on stage. I don't need to have, I don't need to wake up in the middle of the night fixing problems that are totally minute. Back to sleep. I don't need that. But what really hurt me about the last 2 years was people not being able to come together and have a communal experience that catharsis together, that acknowledgement of truth together, that collective experience that will unite them, you know, in the same spirit, right?
Mhm.
So the valuable in that way because they can sit there and they can recognize the truth together, and they can go, "Oh, I'm not the only one who feels this way. Oh, I've got brothers and sisters. We're in this together. We
Mhm.
agree on this. We're going to fight this." You know. So I think in terms of spiritual fuel for people and intellectual fuel and like just emotional fuel, the comedy, if it's done well and it hits its mark, is very, very valuable because it reinforces. Well, again, it's anti-cynical, right?
Mhm.
Like it's the antithesis of the outcome, because what authoritarianism and fascism wants to do is kill your optimism and also kill other people. It kills your optimism if you're a decent person, but the people that it's targeting also, it kills their empathy.
Mhm.
And storytelling is like the greatest empathy machine ever made, because when it's done well, you can be in the skin of any other person, you know,
Mhm.
wherever they come from.
Definitely.
So that's the value that the comedy has. And on the surface level, it has the value because it's so accessible to make
Mhm.
people. I mean, like if you can make a joke and get everybody laughing in the room, you just united everybody in a very powerful way, but you also just communicated to them in a way that's so powerful, they had an involuntary response.
Yep.
Voluntary response.
Mhm.
So comedy is not appreciated enough in terms of how hard it is to do.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's very hard until people realize, oh, I could do that. It's like, no, it's not. It's not as easy. It's a craft that you have to develop. It doesn't just come to you.
Yes, and I liken it, especially working on this show, because I had so many people and scenes. Sometimes it really, a lot of times, just came down. It really is musical because it came down to rhythms: beat, 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 beat. There, you're there, you're there. Come in on that syllable. Literally, sometimes it's the difference between a joke landing really well and kind of not is literally like syllables. You know,
Mhm.
beat, seconds, and precision. So it really is almost like being a musician, and the actors have to be the instrumentalists. You wrote the music, but they're having to like execute it, and then you're having to orchestrate it and arrange the way it's executed for it to be effective. And it really does come down to, so it's very, so all that to say that it's very special when you can pull it off and you can make that connection with the audience and get those laughs, especially when you can sustain a show for an hour. That it's, I mean, last night we haven't talked about this, but we had opening night last night.
Mhm.
And of course it's always, I get, if things are kind of sad, I get less nervous about it because I'm like, well, we're ready. What else can you do at this point? You know, it's like you can't control how the audience is going to respond. All you can do is prepare enough that you. But for the cast, though, especially the ones that haven't done it before, I'm sure they're really nerve-wracked before they
Yeah.
go out the first time. So it was very important to me that we have a first show that was a good-sized audience, and that they got that reassurance from the audience that what you're doing is working. What you're doing is they're appreciating it. And last night was great.
That's
There were
great.
huge laughs. I mean, right where they usually are. It was like the audience was so if I can use a word, ebullient. They were really euphoric at the end of the show. The audience, they loved it, and that's the intention of the show, by the way, is that to give the audience that feeling at the end that I felt as a kid at the end of A New Hope, when they're all like the heroes all together, everybody's smiling, and the music swells. So it went really well. So that was mission accomplished last night for the first show, and the audience was great.
I
And
think
we
that
hope,
kind of leads us into the next question of, or one of the final questions, like, what do you want? What is the overall message that you want the audience to leave with after seeing this? What do you want them to take away? Like when they go home and think, like, what do you want them to have?
the message of the show is in the speech that the princesa gives to
Mhm.
the troops. And it's really just, don't let those forces turn you into to believe that there's no hope,
Mhm.
to give up your hope, and that everything begins with hope. Everything begins with having the optimism that things can be better, that we can play a part in it. So take that, optimism and turn it into courage and turn that courage into action and use that to make the world the place that you want it to be and that it should be. So, I mean, that's, and then the other thing is just like, how great are we as a people? That's the other message. Because you're looking, well, just the statement of all of these super talented brown people on stage, killing it in a unified piece, and that's got the audience rolling, and it's got them crying at times, and then it's got, you know, it's tied into this great reference point that we all know that's kind of non-specific culturally. Well, I mean, this is space. It's all a bunch of white. But yeah, so I mean, that's the other kind of subtextual message. Just we're, you know, this is for us primarily, first and foremost. Everybody else can come on board and enjoy it too, but this is speaking to us, for us, by us, which has been the message of every Latino comedy project show since it began. Has not stopped being a relevant, useful message because we're still underrepresented everywhere.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's something I think we're going to come back for a while, and I struggle with trying to find like, when are we going to not be at this place anymore? But it's hard to see that in the future, right? Because we make baby steps, but then sometimes we make those baby steps and then we get pushed back, and it makes it really hard.
Well, my experience being in those rooms at times in Hollywood, talking to some people years ago, was they really do keep there's no ceiling on how many white people can be involved in anything, but they really keep very close count of whether they've met their quota for anybody else.
Like, oh, this many people of color. Oh, we're good. We have our 5, right? It's kind of,
if even 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're lucky, it's 5. Yeah. And then of course there's always, I mean, I've been paying attention to this since the 90s, the year of the Latino. Another one?
Right. So, yeah. So what is it that you're working on for the future? Do you have any future projects coming up or anything kind of brewing in your head that you're thinking I could make this into the next project that I'm working on, the Latino Comedy Project works on?
Well, it's interesting because I was working on an idea before I committed to Estar Guars that actually Estar Guars, writing Estar Guars helped me clarify. It's a fantasy idea. I won't go into too much detail about it, but it's a big fantasy idea that's kind of trying to create our own version of, you know, the Harry Potters, the Star Wars, is the big kind of hero's journeys. But of course, changing that up though too, that you're different than what we're used to seeing a little bit, and that's based very deeply in like culture, ancient culture. That's something I'm steadily working on. It's a huge idea. The ultimate intent of that is to be a television series, but the idea is such that it could be presented in a similar way to Star Wars, a multimedia thing on live, which I might do to test it. But that's a ways off. The immediate coming year, I'm writing another one-person show called Hispanic Republican Male Into the Pendejo-verse.
Okay.
It's a multiverse-based premise.
Yeah.
Basically just a way to examine this phenomenon of right-wing Latino guys that has kind of become more prominent the last few years. And I've observed it in my own family up close.
And so have I. I've been right there with you.
Yes. And I have 200 pages of notes because of that. Like, so I didn't realize I was writing a show until I decided to write it, but a lot of it was already written just from the observations that I've been making for a few years now. So it's a way to kind of make sense of that. Because again, it's that thing of like with the Star Wars, when I was telling people the idea, I was kind of gauging at the first glance how they would respond to it. And with this idea, I get 2 responses. I get, yeah, what's up with that? Why? You know, people just don't know why. And the other one is, oh God, let me tell you. And they want to tell me
their story.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those are 2 very valuable, which means that there's a lot of identification with the idea. And then there's also a lot of people trying to figure it out. They don't understand. But the overall theme of that show is going to be colonialism, because that's colonizing people's brains.
Yeah.
Right-wing indoctrination is just a continuation of colonizing people. And also there's like, you know, there's other stuff like personality flaws that kind of create the weakness that preys on. So I'm writing that. That's going to be a work in progress. That's going to be debuting in the fall at the Academia Theater. That's the plan. That's the plan right now. And then as far as LCP, I think we might do Gentrify at the San Francisco Sketch Fest next time they do that.
Okay.
Yeah, which we're planning to do that at the MAC before we go to San Francisco. So
Okay.
I'll probably be consumed with writing the Hispanic Republican Mail Show over the summer. That'll probably be the thing I do.
Project.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's going to be a big. I mean, it's not going to be a long show, but I gotta look at all this material and figure out like where the gold is.
Yeah, see what's going to work, what's not going to work, what you can pull out. Yeah.
Well, you write down everything. I mean, I don't know if you write, but you write down everything while you're having ideas, and then later on you look at it and go, okay, that sticks out, and the rest of this.
Yeah, like
maybe
what was I thinking there?
Yeah. Well, that's then.
Yeah.
Or you combine. So I mean, that's a daily.
Yeah, so it was really great to talk to you today. So to keep up with you or the Latino Comedy Project, where can our audience find you online? You guys have a Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah, we have a Facebook page, Latino Comedy Project. If you just Google Latino Comedy Project, our Instagram will come up. That's also Latino Comedy Project. Estar Guars Comedy Fest is on Instagram. I'm on Instagram, adrian.d.villegas. A YouTube channel, Latino Comedy Project. All that stuff will come up if you just Google us. And if you want to get tickets to Estar Guars,
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, it started last night. It runs through May 8th. We also have shows on May the 4th Be With You next Wednesday, special show that day, and on Cinco de Mayo. And we run through Sunday of next week. And that is estarguarscomedyfest.com, and that will take you to the Eventbrite page. And it was a party last night. I will tell you, it was a party. And that's kind of half of the intention of the show, is to create that
environment.
Yes. Yeah. So it's working. This production of it is definitely working again. So
yeah, I'm excited to go see it. I was telling my fiance about it. He got really excited. So we'll go check it out. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Adrian. It was great.
Sorry? When are y'all going to come?
I don't know. He has to work Saturday sometimes. So he works from ACC, but we might be going next Sunday, I think is the day we're looking at.
Cool. Y'all there.
Yeah. It was really great to talk to you today. Thank you so much for sharing so much about Estar Guars. It sounds really exciting. And I'm glad our audience got to experience this with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Annie, too. You and Monet, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.